Okay, hello everyone. This presentation is entitled Understanding Social Issues in Society Through the Lens of Sport. I'm Dr. B. Nalani Butler, and
Hi, I'm Jennifer Willett from Kennesaw State University.
And we will be presenting the information for you today. Oh, very cool little GIF right there, right? He's about to take off. Okay. So the objective of this study was to see if students had a better understanding of social issues after taking a sports sociology course. So students enrolled in a fall sociology and psychology course took a pre and post survey that was administered to them. And the survey really focused on social issues in sport, not psychology issues, even though the class was entitled Psychology and Sociology. This study also provided open-ended answers to find out how students could understand and perceive diversity and different topics you talk about within sport and society, like race, gender, ethnicity, disability, politics, all of that. So just as far as literature goes, by creating contexts in which students encounter others from different backgrounds, interact across those differences, and learn about diverse peoples and perspectives, these programs help students learn the knowledge and skills necessary to function effectively in our increasing diverse, complex society. So it's really important to allow students to really engage with one another and to engage with society and really break down those conversations for them to learn about diversity in general. And diversity is essentially social issues. So that's according to Laird, Enberg, and Hurtado 2016. And according to Lee 2010, research shows that students do notice faculty diversity, and not only that, but also the commitment that faculty show towards initiatives that revolve around diversity and inclusivity. This means that it is important for faculty to not only be diverse, but also inclusive, but also continuously show that they're committed to new ideas and new things, and really showing that they're open to talking about different topics, such as topics that are covered in a sport and society course. So the methodology that we used for this study, we did a survey. We did a Google Form survey, and we used a pre and a post test. So the same exact survey that they used at the beginning during week 1 was the same one that they used at the end during week 16. We had them rank different topics that they thought were important, again, pre and post, and we also had them do a qualitative questionnaire. So this study is both quantitative and then also qualitative. And we coded all of the information, and you'll see how we put everything together in this presentation. So topics that the students were surveyed about: health and wellness, gender and sport, racial and ethnic identity in sport, ethics in sport, politics, social class, disability, religion, violence, and then COVID-19. We try to keep it relevant, but then also incorporate the course topics that were going to be covered in that class. So what was asked pre and post? So we had the students rank the importance of the topic 1 through 10. Each topic included questions pertaining to familiarity, so no knowledge, some knowledge, and fully understand topic. With that being said, the only thing you're going to see, well, the only results you're going to see in our presentation are the percentages for how students fully understood the topic, and we're going to compare the pre and the post. The comfort level of discussion, so 1 through 4, we're only going to discuss how comfortable students were discussing the topic, again, pre and post. So 4 means that they were very comfortable discussing the topic. Examples of knowledge, we asked them to share examples of what they already knew about the topic going in. So again, the pre, and this was open-ended. So this was qualitative, and we coded this. Both Dr. Willett and I coded this separately, and then we went over our answers to see how they were similar. So we triangulated the data in that way. And then example of what students wanted to learn more about. So we wanted to know, hey, was there a topic that we're not necessarily touching on that students want to learn more about? that we have no idea that, they have any knowledge about or want to, learn more about. So again, that was open-ended as well, and that was qualitative. So this is the demographic breakdown of the students that actually took the survey. You can see that the majority of the participants, as far as gender goes, identified as male. And then as far as race, the majority identified as white. So just keep that in mind as we go through the data. So this was the first question we asked. What do you think are important topics for college students to learn regarding social issues? And before they took the class, they said how to manage, communicate, resolve issues, and race and gender. So they were really focused on, and again, a lot of these students were sport management majors, how to manage social issues in sport in a sport context, how to communicate with one another, how to do that effectively, resolve issues, and this is a common theme and we'll touch on that, and then race and gender. And then after the class, they decided that important topics to cover for a college student involved race, gender, and also inequality in sport. So we thought this was pretty interesting since it changed. It stayed the same as far as race and gender. And, due to our current climate here in the US, we completely understand that. And then also inequality. So that popped up. Ranking of importance of topic. When the class first started, the top 3 were health and wellness, ethics, and COVID-19. So, we were going through COVID-19. We were very heavily inundated with that. And then afterwards, race and ethnicity, health and wellness, and then disability. And we'll talk a little bit more about our results in the end, but, we were a little surprised to see ethics. And then we'll tell you a little bit why, because the students really didn't understand what ethics actually were. But due to, everything going on right now with, race and ethnicity and Black Lives Matter, and then just personal health and wellness, it wasn't too surprising to us how their perception changed before the end of the semester. So health and wellness and sport. So the way that this slide looks is how all of the other slides are going to look. We have about 10 slides that look like this, and we're going to talk about pre and also post. So health and wellness, the familiarity. About 79.1% of students felt like they were very familiar with health and wellness prior to taking this course. And then it actually went down, and they felt like, they didn't know that much about it. As far as comfort level, about 40% felt very comfortable talking about it. And then at the end of the course, 43.8% felt very comfortable talking about it. Students knew about physical health, felt that they knew a lot about physical health, mental health, diet, nutrition, and exercise whenever you talk about a topic like health and wellness in sport. And, example of knowledge afterwards is they started to understand the importance of health and wellness. And they really focused on the body and the physical health. And students were more detailed in their comments just as far as health and wellness goes. So it does show that they did learn something throughout the course of the semester, which, as a professor, you're always happy that they're learning more things, even though maybe it's not everything you wanted them to grasp, but they are learning things, and they're being more specific with their comments. What students wanted to learn: impact on sport on psychological health, and also how to improve health and wellness. And what students wanted to learn after the class, they wanted to learn about concussions, so CTE, sports psychology, nutrition, and healthy lifestyle. Like I said before, this class was entitled, it was a sociology and a psychology class. So, the students wanted more psychology, and so I have to keep that in mind because it is a psychology and sociology class. So this was consistent with the pre and the post survey. As far as gender goes, this was pretty significant. Pre, 7% were familiar with gender, and then post, 31.3%. And then comfort level also increased. So students became more comfortable talking about gender in sport after the class. Before they took the class, they had knowledge of equal pay, Title IX, and male and female athletes, and inequality in sport in regards to gender to some degree. After the class, they were more familiar, well, they had examples of the gender wage pay gap, inequality in sports, transgender athletes, Title IX, and also discrimination. So we thought this was pretty interesting because, you know, they focused on the gender binary pre, and then post, they looked at different just how gender was categorized. So it's not male and female necessarily, but you could talk about transgender or intersex athletes and how, you know, certain genders self-identify. As far as what students wanted to learn, equality, discrimination, why there is a difference on how males and females are treated in sport. And then after the class, they wanted to know more about the business of women's sport, equality, and ending discrimination. So throughout this, you're going to see how, you know, it differs as far as perception. But, you know, with this, we found that equality was really big for students, and also discrimination, and really having examples of that. Not only that, but how to end discrimination. These students really wanted to find solutions to the issues that we're combating in sports right now, as far as these social issues go. And so I'm going to pass it over to Jen, and we have racial and ethnicity in sport.
So when the students first took the pre-test, you can see here there was a little familiarity, but that increased a lot, so over 20%. And their comfort level went down a little bit pre and post test as far as discussion goes. And, you know, again, that's a key point. We want students to feel comfortable. This is a sports sociology class, and that's what we're trying to do. And in this case, it went down just a little bit. Examples of knowledge pre taking the course, a lot of them were good at listing some of the current uprisings, the racism that we've seen, the Black Lives Matter. They were able to give examples of racism, but a lot were definitely current topics that we're facing today in society. The post examples, they definitely were more focused, more specific, pertaining to race and sport. They also were focused on Black and white and not other races. So that's something that we need to take in consideration and maybe spend more time. And maybe that's just because our society today, and that's how we see things, as Black and white. So important piece of information that we got from that one. What students wanted to learn pre-class is how racism affects people, how race impacts sport, how do we improve our race relations, and then again, how can we end racism? A lot of the comments that students made were, we don't try to solve the problems, and so that's good to hear from the students. Post, again, let's solve the problem of racism, and then they wanted more of a global perspective of racism and not just here in the United States. The next topic was ethics in sport, and you can see here at the very beginning of the class, students really had no familiarity with the topic, and so we did get an increase there pre and post, and then we got a really big increase when it came to their comfort level in discussing ethics in sport. So almost a 20% increase. As far as their knowledge, when discussing, most of them were within the rules of sport. They talked about ethics within the rules of sport. And we know there's certain rules and you need to follow those rules and not cheat and play fair. Post, we did see that they were more, gave better examples, more specific. They knew some definitions of ethics and other topics, of morality and fairness, and cheating. As far as what they wanted to learn, a lot of them, because they didn't know anything, what is ethics? How does it relate to sport? And, you know, pretty much everything. They're pretty, as far as the number of comments that were listed there, very few compared to other topics. After the class, again, kind of the worldly view is how can we have an impact with ethics in sport organizations, and how can we change it so that we are ethical in what we do in sport. Politics in sport. This was an interesting topic because of, I guess, kind of the state that we're in today. We have a political divide in our country, and sometimes it's harder to discuss politics even within the sport context. And so we did see the familiarity in the pre and post test increase. However, we did see a decrease in the comfort level that students felt when discussing the topic. So I think we can relate a lot to that as far as the political divide in our country. Some of the examples of the knowledge is when it comes to politics, how they influence the world of sport. There was some confusion about why it's even talked about, like why do we need to talk about politics in sport and how is it impacting our sports? There are a couple examples about kneeling for the anthem, and there's some negativity around the politics in sport. And they should be separated. The examples post class is that they gave more specific examples of how some athletes are using their voice and their opinion when it comes to politics and platforms that they have. They gave definitely more specific examples of politics and sport and talking about the Olympic Games and things like that. And then they realized that, guess what, that politics are very much a part of sport and it's not going to go away. So better that we understand it. And the students, as far as what they wanted to learn prior to the class, because they had very little knowledge, how does it play a role? Why are they involved? And then the impact. And then the post was, how can we separate sport and politics, and why are they a part of it, and more of the impact that they have. In terms of social class and sport, this was the lowest when it came to familiarity prior to. We may contribute this to maybe students not taking a sociology course in the general education. So again, a reason why it's very important to have in sport management curriculum. But they did have an increase in their knowledge and familiarity pre and post test. And also their comfort level when discussing went up about 10% pre and post test. Prior to the class, they knew a little bit about the social classes, upper versus lower, and some of the advantages and disadvantages based on what class that you're in. And the examples of knowledge after they had taken the class expanded. They now were able to look at participation depending on social class, who played what sports, and then the opportunities that they saw, because there was such a drastic difference when it came to socioeconomic status and all the advantages that were given to people with higher incomes. As far as students, what they wanted to learn, they wanted to learn how and why social class matters in sport. And this goes back to kind of the millennial, is they want to help solve problems, and let's find ways that we can help lower income athletes be sport participants. After the class, some of the things they still wanted to learn about is making improvements. So we learned about all these differences between our upper and lower class athletes and opportunities. How can we change that and make differences? And then they also wanted more of a global view. So just outside the United States, let's look at other countries. In terms of disability, again, this was a lower familiarity. Not many people had understood or taken a course when it relates to disability of sport. But their familiarity level went up with the class, and so did their comfort level, just a small, when it talks about increasing or discussing the topic after the class. When it came to examples of knowledge prior to the class, many were not familiar with it, like we said, and they did list Special Olympics and Paralympics, but they had no idea the difference between the two. A couple of students said, though, I don't know the difference between the two, and I think they're the same. And they also discussed there's definitely lack of opportunities for our disabled athletes. At the end of the course, they did have better knowledge and knew the difference between Paralympics and Special Olympics. And when it came to what they wanted to learn, these are our sport managers of the future, and so they wanted to learn what are the opportunities out there for people with disabilities if they are working in these different programs, how it can be more inclusive, And we see that again at the post and the results here is how do we help, right? How do we make accommodations? Let's look at some technology. Let's offer these programs for people with disabilities. And so that's great to hear. Religion in sport, another one that most students were unfamiliar with prior to the class. And we did have an increase of about 14% post and speaking about it. The same thing with their discussion levels. That did go up a little bit pre and post test with their comfort and discussion in the class. Examples of the knowledge that they wanted to learn more about is sport allowing, just having, why is sport intertwined with religion? They did know that a lot of athletes will display religious motions, movements, and use their platform. And they did give some examples of Muslim women when it came to religion in sport and how they are denied a lot of times participation. After the class, post-test, students gave knowledge that they did know the impact of religion on sport participation and who plays. The athletes were displaying different religions, and then more about the Muslim women came up. One of the interesting pieces that we got out of this was the students did not talk about Christianity when it came to this topic. It was mostly other religions. So we thought that really interesting, and maybe that's just because they're familiar with that more than other ones. When it comes to violence in sport, our students had a little bit more familiarity. We see it more often, TV, media. So their comfort level pre and post, even though it was somewhat high at the beginning, it ended up really high, about 40% felt comfortable discussing violence in sport. Their examples of knowledge, they were able to list a ton of different violent acts that they had seen in sport. They did narrow down a couple of sports where they felt violence was more prevalent, and those were football, hockey, and rugby. And they also discussed aggression and violence in sport. Post-test, they still were able to understand the physical violence and give examples, and then they also talked about the repercussions for those that were doing those violent acts in sport. Students wanted to learn prior to the class why it happens, why is it involved in sport, how does it impact sport directly, and then is there any correlation between violence and sport? Post-test and after the class, students wanted to learn, well, now we know why it's here, and it is here in sport. Let's find ways that we can decrease it and make sport a safe environment for everyone that wants to participate, spectate, and be involved. And then our last topic here, the COVID-19 in sport. This is interesting because there was a lot of familiarity, and that's, I guess, because we're living it, and we see that it's all over the media. So students felt pretty familiar with it, and their comfort level pre-test was really high, but after the class that went down just a little bit. So not really sure what we're relating that one to. Examples of knowledge that they had prior to the class. I mean, we all saw it. Sports stopped. They took a pause. They were changed or canceled, and they talked about, adapting to this new normal sport. After the class, the students were able to give examples of the barriers because of the pandemic, how we need to keep it safe, how it impacts sport, and then any of the restrictions because of the pandemic. So they gave a little bit more specific examples of the two. What did students want to learn prior to the course? The long-term impacts, obviously, we're in sport, and they all want jobs in sport. So what does this mean for me when I go to get a job? Will it still be around? How will it look different? Will they still need me? How to cope with it, and then how do we move forward and protect our players and our spectators? After the class, students were looking at the impact on sports, and then, how do we get back to normal? Let's look at some of these best practices on, moving forward and keeping everybody safe. So the analysis, obviously studying sports sociology is going to enhance students' ability to be active and informed citizens and give them the ability to influence society and choices and different policies. So we're hoping that, students by taking this course can look more objectively at our society and other societies, and how we all fit together and change. And, it makes us aware of these consequences of these different social changes. So we definitely feel it's important as a part of our sport management curriculum, and it prepares students for a lifetime of change and developing these appreciations of diversity and human behavior, and understanding all those within the sporting context. Some of the key things that we saw were, we had the highest increase from pre and post test in gender and their increase in familiarity and their discussion level. So I think that was a key topic to touch on. A lot of the students prior to the class, maybe because they saw the psychology in the course, were looking for topics related to psychology and not necessarily sociology. And they kind of want to know the hows and the whys. Post-test, we saw a major increase in knowledge. Students were able to give very specific examples in all of those different categories. They recognized the importance of it, why we need to talk about it, why it's in the curriculum. And what's great about it is the students really wanted to know solutions for the issues that are plaguing our world. So when we talk about racism, sexism, anything, they want to know how can we make a difference, and how can we change, how can we make a change and make it better for our sport, and anybody participating. And thank you for attending.
Thank you so much. And if you need to get a hold of us, here are our email addresses. Yeah. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Well, hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Butler, and then we have Dr. Willett. So we're here to answer any questions that you all have. Obviously, our presentation, it was about understanding social issues in society through the lens of sport. And we really just, the whole kind of idea behind this was trying to create a more inclusive classroom by understanding what the students are retaining and what they really hope to get out of a class that touches on, aspects of social issues in sport.
All right. So I can start. I made notes while I was watching it, and the notes are somewhat terrible, but I saw that there was something interesting about in the post-test. Students had a kind of different score from the pre-test with their views on social class. I think there were some areas that were a little surprising to you. My notes are unfortunately too vague, but you know the data better. So if you can maybe if that's a spark to go back to talk about that particular element, I would be interested in hearing more thoughts about that.
So basically we did a pre and post-test survey, and we just asked the students questions, both quantitatively and qualitatively, just about, their familiarity with certain topics pertaining to social issues, if it was like race, class, gender, anything like that. We asked them about their comfort level of discussion, examples of knowledge, and then what they wanted to learn more about. I think sometimes as instructors, I think we've all been there, if we've been in the classroom, we, put something together and we don't necessarily see what the students necessarily want. This was particularly interesting to me because I just finished doing a publications on social issues in sport. So I really just wanted to understand what the students were really grasping and understanding from there. One thing that Dr. Willett and I found with our analysis that we found particularly exciting was that students really want to know about solutions to issues plaguing the world. So they were always like, hey, how can we make this better? It wasn't like, I want to learn more about this topic. They wanted to learn more about certain topics, but it was more or less like, hey, what's the solution to, end racism? Like, we want the solution to problems, but they really want to know what they can do to contribute and to make the world a better place from understanding these certain aspects. So we can talk about all these things, but they wanted actionable items at the end.
In regards to Heather, your question on the social class, most all of the post-test were, there was an increase in familiarity with the topic, as well as their comfort level discussing it. So I know this class is structured very discussion based, and so that's what we're hoping for, is that, after reviewing these different topics, that students want to and feel comfortable discussing. And some of them are very difficult topics when you throw in politics and, any of these, equity and race and things like that. So that was a good thing that we found in our study.
So to that end, I was curious, and I may have missed this in the presentation, but what level was the course at?
I can't hear you. Can you speak up, Craig?
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Better.
Okay, so what level is the course being taught
at? This is the undergraduate level. This is not the graduate level.
But 200, 300, 400?
3,000 level.
3,000.
Okay.
Yeah, most of them in there are, would you say, sophomores, juniors?
Yes, sophomores, juniors. They've had the intro class. They've had like a class or two before, but then they just dive into it. And then also I want to add, just, teaching at Kennesaw, teaching here in the, greater Atlanta metro area. We do have I would say a pretty diverse class, and you can see that from the demographics as well. So as far as that goes, we have about 20 to 25% about there, like about a quarter of the students, like 20, identify as a minority. So that helps definitely with discussions and bringing different aspects of somebody's identity to that space.
Can I ask how you managed any difficult conversations that might arise in the classroom around these issues?
I always tell the students when I'm teaching this course, I'm like, the first thing I tell them is like, we're going to get really comfortable being uncomfortable. And then I go through, and talk about, what respect is, and that if you think you're going to say something that is going to offend somebody or that's inappropriate, 100% don't say it. I allow them to, I'm like, don't do it. I allow them to actually like have notes that they could write down and give anonymously to me if they have like a question about something. And I try to keep that space open so that if they do have a question that they think it's going to be, or a comment that's going to be like very controversial, then I'm like, hey, slip it to me. I don't need to know who's saying it, but then I can bring it up as a topic to address in class in a way that, I guess I deem as appropriate, so that, we don't have this kind of back and forth going on. So that's what I would say too. I also say that if you want to bring up a topic, also try to bring up a solution for how to solve that issue, so that we're not, going back and forth and arguing about something.
And that really came through in the comments in the qualitative side about the students wanting to find answers and issues, and let's help the problem.
What were some of the most surprising results from this, or was it pretty much straightforward, and based on what you found in literature review or any other previous studies?
We did have some comfort levels go down as far as students wanting to talk about certain topics, and one of them was politics. And so we kind of were thinking about the political divide of the country, and this class was taught in the fall, and so there was definitely a lot of things that were happening, and so even though it was a small decrease, we still felt that was like a surprising finding, but understandable.
We also found like the ranking of topics was surprising at first. You know, health and wellness stayed at the top 3, but you know, they ranked ethics as number 2. Excuse me. When we went through and you know, looked at ethics, it seemed that they actually really didn't understand what ethics were. So that was interesting to us. And then also COVID-19, what Dr. Willett was saying when we did this study, just COVID-19 was on everybody's mind and how it impacted sport. So that ended up being number 3. And when you look afterwards, as far as the post, race and ethnicity ended up turning up as number 1, where it wasn't, you know, it was 4 before. Health and wellness stayed in the top 3, and then also disability and sport moved up, but then COVID-19 moved all the way down to the bottom. So it was just really interesting how their ideas, once taking the course, started to change. Dr. DeMartini?
Hi, how's it going?
Yeah.
Hey.
I had a question about the instrument. So it seemed like you guys wrote your own, is that right? And did you consider, because I've been looking at doing some similar stuff, so I've been looking at what instruments are already out there. So yeah, can you talk a little bit about how you decided to write your own, and is there any worry that it's going to be harder to do anything with this information with your own instrument instead of one that's already been validated?
I guess we'll find out, right? When we publish this and we submit it and we get the right values we submit, or we have to go to a different journal. This was really for us to understand like our own teaching pedagogy and how to make the class better. We're going to continue to do this study and just see how we can make it better. I'm a qualitative researcher, so I'm all into coding data. I want to know the why, I want to know the how. So, you know, if we were to use an instrument where, you know, you were more or less, it was more quantitative, we don't feel like we would have necessarily gotten to the crux of everything, like, you know, what they wanted to learn, the interesting findings. And we wanted to set this up to be a little bit more exploratory than anything else.
So could you tell us a little bit more about the instrument and what were your like rationale, or how did you go about it? Why did you choose basically to go by your own instrument or develop your own? Because that's really interesting. I have never thought about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, teaching so the class was actually, it's called social sport sociology and psychology. It's a psychology and sociology course. And we've actually talked about possibly splitting it up in the future, just because there's so much to touch on with each of those topics. We decided just to do our own instrument because we just wanted to learn more about our students, and we had specific questions that we wanted to know more about. I just, like I said before, finished a publication regarding sport and social issues in sport with Dr. Ron Woods through Human Kinetics. And so, you know, we go back and forth all the time, you know, for the past couple of years in terms of what to touch on as far as topics for students. And really all we're doing is bouncing ideas off of our own classes and then asking other instructors. So it was really just, you know, exploratory and really just trying to understand what they think is important compared to also what we think is important. So that might be something we do in the future, comparing what professors think is important to teach their students versus what students think, you know, are the important topics to touch on. So really just trying to bridge that gap between student and instructor and understanding that more. So that's why we did it that way.
Sounds great. And Dr. Alderman, do I say correctly? I had another question that you put in the chat. How will you use the data to modify other courses like content process or example?
This is also really helpful because there is some overlap in some topics in our courses. And so by doing this study, we are able to find out, okay, this is what the students want to cover. This is what we need to cover. So let's cover it in this class. And then potentially you don't have the overlap in other classes if you can cover it in one versus the other.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I've started to even change the class more for this semester. You know, obviously it's hard to have so much engagement with like a COVID pandemic kind of environment. But, you know, making sure that at the end of the class, you know, they have more deliverable items, which it's like, maybe you can go volunteer for this organization to help out in this way, you know, looking more in terms of like social justice solutions for different things, really pushing on them, like, you're the future leaders. You know, there are going to be, you know, the jobs that we're preparing you for now, they don't exist yet, right? So, you know, how, you know, think a little bit more about that. So just bringing more, I guess taking away the theoretical side more, and more like practical solutions in terms of how do we deal with this situation when it comes up. If you're a sport manager and you have a, you know, transgender child, you know, in your sporting academy, how do you deal with this? So like, how do you deal with this situation? You know, how do we make this fair? How do we make this equitable? How do you have those conversations? Where do you find those sources to have those conversations? And I think when you frame it more like that, then they're more so, hey, yeah, I need to know about this because I don't know how to necessarily solve this issue, more or less than I don't believe that this is right, or, you know, I don't agree with this. You know, we get away from that conversation in terms of, no, we have to have this conversation. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when and how we're going to have it.
Any other questions? We have about 50 minutes left. So, oh yeah, there's a question coming in the chat from Christina Garcia from Azusa Pacific University. I hope I said that correctly. The class is a sociology and psychology class. What will be the psychology site? What will be the side psychology side?
Okay, so like, how much are you doing with both? Like how I split up the class? It's taught differently with this particular study. I would say about 75% of the class is sociology, and then the other side is psychology.
And this class morphed from, we kind of split from a department. And so we had more coaches and physical educators. And that's kind of how we got the psychology part of it. And since we have split departments, we have focused more on the sociology side and just covered a little bit of the psychology piece.
So I mean, I'm sure that was part of the presentation, but still a part of your paper. But what do you think is the ultimate goal of that study? Like, do you look at it more from a practical side or more theoretically? Do you actually try to maybe really provide recommendations on how to change social aspects class or sport for sociology of sport classes? What is kind of like really the rationale for you to pursue this research?
So I think there's two things. Just to help with publications in the future, just as far as like textbooks, you know, how to really create material so that the instructor can get their point across and have more of an impact, you know, on the classroom. Just kind of more like an easier roadmap, right? That aspect. And then last year, actually at Cosma in Baton Rouge, I did a session with Dr. Daniel Kelly, and we talked about diversifying the classroom and different aspects that you could do with that. So we got a lot of questions just in terms of from other instructors in terms of how do we necessarily teach these subjects? What should we do if we're uncomfortable talking about it? Because, you know, not every single department has somebody that's comfortable talking about sociology of sport or has a background in that, right? We're all in sport management, and some programs don't even have that in their core curriculum. And we really wanted to stress the importance of that, and that, hey, just because you're uncomfortable talking about that doesn't mean you can just not talk about that, right? You have to talk about that, and then trying to give professors more or less ideas for how they would go about discussing these social issues and teaching the course in the future from the student's point of view, as far as the importance and also their comfort level of talking about these topics.
And let me add on, and when you look at the textbooks for sport sociology, you know, we can't all cover 20, 25 chapters in one semester. So it's nice to know and look at the content and kind of do a content analysis and have options out there for the instructors, and especially those that they feel comfortable, you know, talking about and bringing into their classroom. So it's helpful on that side too, looking at the actual textbooks and the content.
Absolutely. So Heather has another question that she put in the chat. Are there any issues where you see a big difference in basically understanding between the faculty and the students regarding this? I hope, Heather, I explained that correctly, but feel free to add something.
Can clarify if needed.
I think you bring up a really great question. I think this is going to be another part of the study, seeing what faculty members deem as important in comparison to students. This is really just coming from, me and like Dr. Willett and I, it's just really coming from our point of view. So we wanted to make this more exploratory, and we've had conversations, with one another, but we haven't really done the ranking in terms of what we think is the most important. Like in our minds, we've had conversations about it, but we haven't actually put it down on paper. So I think that would be really interesting to get a bunch of professors in the room and be like, what do you think is important?
Yes, please, Dr. Collis, go ahead and ask the question.
Hi, thanks for this study. And one thing I'm thinking about as I watch this, and then just what you said, is that I don't teach our course related to this, but with our colleagues that do teach it, I think the main thing I'm taking away is I don't know the last time that they ask our students anything about what they would like to learn. And so I feel like you've given me that next step to ask them that at the very baseline to have a conversation about this, because like you said, we have people who teach these classes at our universities, but sometimes maybe they don't have the background that maybe allows them to reach all of our students in the most effective way. And so I think this has been really great for me to think about how to pose that question to them, and also have them maybe put forth, how do they teach the class? I think I know what's in there, but maybe as a collective faculty, we should all get together and decide on what should be in there and what do we believe is really important. Because sometimes I feel like over this last year, my mind kept popping up like, I hope that's being covered in our sports sociology class. I really hope they're having these tough conversations. But I admit I don't know that. And so I think this has really inspired me to think about, let's have that conversation from the faculty, let's survey our students. And there's no better time than the present to get this started. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And, like another piece to that too, is just also sport professionals, people that are actually in the industry that are employing our students. I've been, because of COVID and everything, I've been trying to do some like asynchronous like interview type of things, right? And post them for our students so that they can get that experiential learning. And so what they tell me, when I ask them like the diversity and inclusion, how can we equip our students? It's interesting to see their responses. Like, you guys need to be teaching this stuff. We need a more inclusive environment type of thing. So, just really connecting the dots, bridging the gap with the faculty to the students to the industry, essentially. So yeah, thank you so much for that comment.
Any other questions? We have about 8 minutes left, so we have at least space or room for 1, 2, 3 more questions. So please feel free to come forward.
I'll go again. Can you hear me better this time?
Yes.
Okay. So you talked about how students maybe have changed their willingness to engage and speak and talk about these difficult subjects within the semester. Just as another follow-up, I'd be curious to know how it changes their perspective throughout the rest of their career while they're with you. Like if you could do a follow-up with the students again as seniors, or going into their internship or something like that, to see if they're still having the willingness to engage in those conversations would be useful to see the long-term benefit.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
So any other comments, questions? So what are the next steps with your with your research? Are you gonna publish it and then maybe have follow up, maybe research, or what are some of the future directions for research?
We're going to collect more data on this and hopefully publish it. So that's, I mean, that's pretty much it. We want just a bigger data set and to look through everything.
Sounds great. So what do you think some of the difficulties with the study maybe? Of course, everything is in your presentation, but since we have some extra time, maybe we could talk about it. Where did you see issues, concerns, of course, limitations? Obviously, you already said maybe sample size. But what are other things you feel like with those research studies are difficult or to keep in mind or to be considerate about?
A lot of it has to do with the instructor in the course, because one instructor could be very different than another. So it is, I guess, a limitation there, looking at having to have the same instructor talking about the same topics throughout the semester in the same way. And even in discussions, you know, students could bring things up that you may not have talked about in the semester before. So I think that's just kind of the nature of the beast in that course.
Yeah, and also comparing modalities. So at Kennesaw, we offer 3 different types of modalities: asynchronous, in-person, and then a hybrid course. So, you know, just kind of comparing as far as having students asynchronously versus, you know, the other 2 modalities, you know, are they really grasping the material? Are they really understanding it? And, you know, maybe we need to change a little bit more just as far as the content and how we're really putting that forth to them to see, you know, where they're really getting the understanding from, like which kind of modality too. So that's definitely, you know, an aspect of that.
Yeah, I totally see that. All right, well, we have 5 minutes left, so why don't we start wrapping it up and maybe give you a few more minutes to say some final words or remarks that you feel like sharing with us. And maybe if there's another question, then we'll have time for that. And otherwise, thank you so much for being here and for answering all our curious questions, and for you guys coming in here, for attending. Thank you so much. But I'll give it up to you, Dr. Butler and Dr. Willett, sorry, Willett, right? I still butchering names. I apologize. It's got to work on that. All right. Well, up to you for a few more minutes. Do you have any final thoughts?
I just want to thank you guys for attending. I actually had a question for everybody that's here. How much do you all include your students just as far as like the curriculum mapping and asking them, or also industry professionals, in terms of when you create your curriculum and decide these are the courses we should have, these are the topics we should cover?
That's a really great question.
I'll start off. I would say students, probably not enough. And we lean on our graduates because they know our program, they know our university, they know the types of students that we see here. So we kind of lean on those graduates that are in the industry to help us with changes in the curriculum.
I would agree. We probably, like I mentioned earlier, we involve our students, but not to the extent I think we should. And we lean pretty heavily on our advisory board. Annually, we do a recap and ask for input. So that's been helpful. But we could do more, certainly.
No, thank you. Advisory board, great.
Yeah, that's we're moving that direction. So we're putting one together right now.
With ours, unfortunately, I don't do it at all in my sports sociology class, but the class where we do it is our seminar classes, which are just pre-professional skills. They're the classes that lead up to our internship. And there we do it with both students and industry professionals. But where I found it really helpful is actually getting the advice of our career development center, asking them what are the skills that our students are lacking as they go out into the world, or that they're hearing that employers want. So my internship coordinator essentially just interviews the site supervisors to hear what skills our students are not doing well in. We ask our seniors at the end, what skills they didn't feel like they felt as prepared about, and then the career development center. But I will admit that we only do it in that class. We have not been doing it in the other ones.
And Dr. Wright, she just added on in the chat, assessment data, course evaluation, exit survey, advisory boards and faculty, continuous improvement committee within our college. And then Heather, she's asking, Dr. Perry, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to mention, yeah, I muted there for a second. I was just going to mention in some of my classes, I just kind of do an informal kind of session at towards the end of the semester to get some feedback and to see what they thought about the class. I know sometimes when you're doing that with the professor, it's not always the most honest responses, but I try to allow for it to be a session that they feel open about sharing things that they thought worked well in the course, and also just things maybe we missed throughout the semester, just for the next classes that are coming after them.
Awesome. That's great. Anyone else? We don't have a minute left. So let's wrap it up. Again, thank you so much for being here. Thanks so much for responding all these great questions. Thanks for asking those great questions. And it's been a pleasure being with you for 30 minutes. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank
Bye.
you, everybody.
Thank you.